Hey leaders, in this episode of Leading Collaborative Response, Lorna and I have the opportunity to sit down and discuss the connection between the tiers in our continuum of support and the layers of team that we establish as part of our collaborative structures and processes. We know when engaging in collaborative response efforts within your organization, understanding each of the foundational components is critical, but then more importantly is how do we connect and align? In this episode, we're going to talk about that alignment between our tiers of support and the layers of team that we establish within our school to be able to respond to the needs of students. So let's get started.
Are you a leader who is navigating the nuances of leading collaborative response in your school or district? Are you unsure of what collaborative response is? Are you looking to understand the critical role leadership plays when establishing and refining a collaborative response approach?
Collaborative response began as a grassroots approach to focus on the needs of students through a framework of collaboration. That approach has grown to a movement that is training leadership and education.
Through the Leading Collaborative Response podcast, Kurtis and I share our own experiences of leading collaborative response and lessons learned as we continue to learn and gain insight through the experiences of working alongside others. We also have the opportunity to engage in conversations with school and divisional leaders implementing the framework in their own organizations.
We know great leaders build great teams because that is what every child deserves. Subscribe to the Leading Collaborative Response podcast and join the thousands of schools seeing success for students through intentional and focused collaborative efforts. As we start off this episode, it's going to come with an admission.
Yeah.
We understand now how valuable the connection is between the tiers of support within our continuums and the layers of teams. The admission is, when we started this collaborative response, we had no idea.
It actually just shows that we've learned.
Yeah, very much so. The topic that we're coming with you today is the intentional alignment between our tiers of support and layers of team. But this is something that we had to understand over time, because as we reflect back, we had the layers of team in place within our own school. It's just
not clearly defined.
But when we introduced this thing called a collaborative team meeting, which operated a little bit differently than how we were talking about students in the past, it made such a substantial difference that we thought it was the one thing that if schools could do this, they might see some of that similar success for not just responding to needs of students, but supporting the needs of staff. But it was not understanding that the reason it was having success is because it was happening in conjunction with these other types of conversations that were happening.
One part of a bigger whole.
Right.
Yeah, and when I think about that time, there were indications very early on, actually, that we were missing something, because what we would have is as we developed the collaborative team meeting, then we would really help teachers to understand that we're really focusing on practice during that time. But then teachers would always say, but when do I get a chance to talk about Jimmy, who is requiring a lot of my time, and I'm quite concerned about the supports that we put in place for them. And our response at that point in time was, well,
somewhere else.
Let's schedule a conversation later on, and we can talk more about how we provide support.
Okay, so let's go back then from something we did understand very early on, which was 4 tiers within a continuum. Now this, of course, the idea of tiers and initially that idea of a pyramid of interventions, highly informed by
all of our research was founded in the pyramid of interventions.
And programs or frameworks like response to intervention or multi-tiered systems of supports, the work in PBIS, all of them showed tiers of response, and traditionally it would be within 3 tiers. Well, we actually found out really early that when you tiered the students, that made sense. Over time, we found out when you tiered the support, calling everything within this one tier universal was somewhat overwhelming, somewhat broad, and we've found out through this that there are some expectations that we're going to hold each other accountable to that will be across every classroom across the school because it's just good practice. But then we also needed a space to talk about, but then how do you differentiate?
Right. And when I think about that time too, that we did lots of reading around Carolyn Tomlinson and her ideas around differentiation and being able to really explore that as a professional learning topic, but really challenged with how do we make that live in our classroom?
Yeah.
And what we wanted to be able to do through the continuum of supports work that we were developing is that clearly define what we do for all students, and then also clearly define what we do in the classroom for some students some of the time.
And that response may differ from classroom to classroom, and the tools that you have to differentiate might be different than mine. How could we learn from one another? But that led to that initial 4 tiers of support. We'll be right back to continue this episode. Are you looking to maximize the collaborative capacity of your school or district? Are you wanting to take your professional learning communities or response to intervention work to the next level? Have you started the work in collaborative response but are looking to reignite or deepen your plans? We would love to have you join us at the 2025 Collaborative Response Retreat happening May 2nd and 3rd in beautiful Lacombe, Alberta.
Over the 2 days, we have an intentionally designed program of breakout sessions and sharing, along with supported team planning time to ensure that you walk away with a plan for introducing or strengthening collaborative response in your organization for the upcoming year. With a concentrated focus on team planning, networking, and individualized support for your school, the Collaborative Response Retreat is an outstanding opportunity to grow your team's understanding and implementation of this powerful support framework. We are also planning some fun time so you can relax and enjoy activities as a team in our historic community of Lacombe in central Alberta.
In addition, participants will gain access to an extensive repository of online resources to deepen their understanding and support ongoing implementation. Plan to join a growing network of educators dedicated to responding to the diverse needs of their learners. We've capped our attendance at 140 participants, so make sure to register early to secure your team spot. We're looking forward to seeing you in Lacombe in May.
Join the email list at bit.ly/25CR retreat. Wait. That's bit.ly/25CR retreat. Wait.
Join the list to access an early registration window before general registration opens. And if you register during that window, we're going to say thank you with an additional free gift valued at $200. Join the early notification list now. And now back to our conversation. That initial 4 tiers of support. So that tier 1 and 2 were very classroom based. In fact, our easiest explanation of this is tier 1, what do we do for all students across all classrooms virtually all the time? Tier 2, supports we provide for some students in some classrooms some of the time. Tier 3, supports provided by someone other than the classroom teacher but still within the school. And tier 4, supports provided by someone external to the school.
Recognizing that all of those descriptions are about supports. It's what we as adults are doing in the building to ensure that a student is successful.
So let's set that understanding of the 4 tiers aside and talk about now the layers of team. So we understood that just focusing on the collaborative team meeting was valuable because it was a different type of conversation about students, but over time, we saw schools trying to put all their conversations and the different tiers of support, how will we support these students, into that one space. And it helped us to understand that actually what we had, again, not super intentionally or well defined, but we had layers of team happening
We did.
within the school. We had times where teams were collaboratively planning, creating goals that they were working on. Then we'd come into these collaborative team meetings and have a conversation about, well, what else could you do? What do you do in your classroom? What do you do in yours? Then there was another team meeting on a much more regular basis to look at students requiring supports beyond the classroom. And then there was always times where we would be working in conversations about one child, and oftentimes those one child conversations meant involving supports from beyond the school.
Well, and I think this is a good demonstration of the evolution of collaboration in schools as well. Thinking about those individualized supports, or even small group support, we would be providing through a resource room teacher. And it was really within their role that they attended to the supports for that child, rather than within the context of a team. And we now very much, and for a number of years now, have really looked at how do we coordinate and collaborate around the needs of students.
So we'll make sure to include into the video description a couple blog postings that talk about these layers of team, but they've now become really critically important when we think about that foundational component of collaborative structures and processes in which the collaborative team meeting exists. Now, once we had those 4 layers of team, it became a huge aha to go, oh my goodness, these team layers actually connect to the tiers of support. So that when we're engaged in team planning, where we're likely not talking about the needs of any individual student, we're really looking at what are we doing across all of our classrooms, or even across our entire school, to support as many students as possible. Really, we're having tier 1 focused conversations in that space,
which are really focused on curriculum, instruction, assessment, and pedagogy.
You bet. When we get into the collaborative team meeting, it's actually intentionally designed to be a space where we're exploring differentiated practice. When we get into the school support conversations, this is typically where we are coordinating and establishing the supports within the school, but in addition to what's happening in the classroom.
Which is really that intervention piece, whether it's small groups or whether for individual students, but it's really about how do we intervene and provide more intensive support for students beyond the classroom.
And when we're exploring then tier 4 level supports, which involves expertise from outside of our school, we're going to bring them into conversations, but we're probably talking about individual students that we are trying to impact through their involvement. So again, this is not a cut and dry black and white, but the connection between the tiers and the layer of teams become really critical understandings. And it also starts to demonstrate incongruencies in our process when, for instance, we're in a collaborative team meeting and all of the responses or intended responses are looking at tier 3 out of the classroom supports. That means there's a misalignment between the layer of team and its intent and the type of responses or supports that are being envisioned.
So ultimately, if our continuum of supports is what we do to provide supports for students at what each of those levels, then we ensure that we have those 4 levels of team that are also very explicitly intentional in their purpose, and we align those 2, then we can ensure that we have a place and a team where every child has the opportunity to be able to be brought forward and discussed and determined supports for. So it doesn't leave anyone out.
Well, and through those layers of team, then you can really, truly ensure that driving mantra of every child deserves a team, even though we may not be having that conversation one child at a time, because as soon as we're one child, now we're at that case consult. And it was funny when we really saw these layers of team and the alignment, it became, oh my goodness, the way we often design the collaborative team meeting is as a sequence of mini case consults where
Yeah.
it's one student at a time. And oh my goodness, we really need to look at the format, which is why that key issue process, which we now see as absolutely integral to the collaborative team meeting, being in place, but because it came from an alignment to those tiers. So we'll include some resources, but please share out questions that you may have or comments. What has that alignment of your layers of team with your continuum of supports meant for you, and how you're supporting not just the needs of students, but doing so in a way that's building capacity and connectedness between each and every one of our staff members in involvement in those teams.
And when we say every child deserves a team, this is what we're talking about.
Absolutely. So please reach out. We'd love to hear your comments. And as always, thank you for everything that you do to support your students, staff, and educational communities. Take care.
See you soon.
For more on collaborative response, visit jigsawlearning.ca or join the JL Insider to receive access to newly added resources and content. Make sure to follow us on social media. Subscribe to the podcast and the Jigsaw Learning YouTube channel to access past and upcoming episodes. Join us again to continue to build your own capacity and leading collaborative response in your context.